During the Korean War in the early 1950s between North Korea and South Korea, approval was granted for a United Nations army made up of 16 nations to send help to South Korea, as the North Korean army refused to withdraw their troops after their invasion on Seoul, despite the fact that this appeal was made by the United Nations Security Council. The United States were one of the primary nations within the army, and the UN troops consisted mainly of Americans. The army's top priority was to hold off a perimeter around the southern city of Busan until reinforcements would arrive later on in August. On September 15, 1950, the US X-Corps managed to push back the North Korean troops over the 38th parallel, and a request for the UN troops to move into North Korea was accepted by US President Harry S. Truman. Upon doing this, the UN army managed to capture the North Korean capital Pyongyang, only to be pushed back into South Korea with heavy losses, after a Chinese army of approximately 250,000 soldiers decimated the UN army on their approach to the Yalu River. The two nations continued to battle, and by March 14, 1951, Seoul is captured for the fourth time by the UN forces. On July 10, 1951, an attempt for truce between the UN and the Communists fails, and the fighting continues for 2 more years. The United States Air Force realised that it did not have an effective military transport which was capable of airlifting combat troops over medium distances and delivering them to short unprepared runways, and in the early months of 1951, the Air Force Tactical Command issued a specification for a new medium cargo transport. This specification is known as the General Operating Requirement, and it was sent to military aircraft manufacturers such as Boeing, Douglas, Fairchild, Lockheed, Martin, Chase Aircraft, North American and Northrop. This specification detailed that the aircraft must be able to carry 92 infantrymen, or 64 paratroopers on a mission with a combat radius of 1,100 nautical miles, or alternatively a 30,000 pound cargo more than 960 miles. It also included that the aircraft must be able to slow down to 125 knots for assault landings or paradrops, to have both a rear ramp for heavy equipment drops with side doors for paratroop drops, to be able to handle cumbersome and heavy machinery and weapons, and lastly to be able to fly with one engine out. This was essentially a competition around which aircraft manufacturer could design the most versatile aircraft that would match the specification given by the Air Force Tactical Command. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation would later on win the competition, and on July 2nd, 1951, a contract was made for the aircraft manufacturer to produce 2 prototypes, known as the YC-130. This was the birth of the Hercules family that we know today. The YC-130 design team was led by Willis Hawkins, who at this point was a Lockheed aeronautical engineer for 14 years. Hawkins stated, "We basically took the dimensions of the biggest piece of equipment that the Air Force had specified, drew a circle around its cross-section, and turned the circle into a tube about the length of a railroad boxcar. We put wings, a nose and a tail on it, and we had the design." He also added, "We put the aircraft low to the ground so we could use the ramp to get cargo on and off easily." The aircraft production occurred in the Burbank facility and would go on over the course of the next 3 years. On August 23, 1954, the YC-130 had its first flight from Burbank to the Air Force Flight Test Station, nearby Edwards Air Force Base in California. The first flight was a success, and the aircraft's performance shocked everyone, as the aircraft was far more manoeuvrable than expected, and the engines enabled it to take off in just 800 feet. To put this into perspective, the Airbus A330-200 at maximum takeoff weight requires for a runway of approximately 2,220 metres, which is around 7,280 feet. This is over 9 times longer than the distance at which the YC-130 could take off at. This was due to the 4 turboprop engines, known as Allison T56-A, which delivered 3,750 horsepower each, driving a 3-bladed reversible propeller. These engines were specifically developed for the C-130 and produced much more power for their weight than their predecessor piston engines. Due to the massive success of the prototypes, a new production contract was created, and the C-130 program was moved from Burbank to Lockheed's facility in Marietta. The first production was the C-130A, which was almost identical to the prototype. The C-130A first flew on April 7, 1955 at Marietta, and it would go on to enter service in December 1956 after 231 aircraft are delivered. Just under 2 years after, the C-130B entered service after 230 aircraft are delivered. The C-130B had an improved fuel capacity due to auxiliary fuel tanks that were built into the center wing section. The engines of the aircraft also saw an improvement, as the simplistic three-bladed propellers were replaced with four-bladed Hamilton standard propellers. One of the innovations that came with the C-130B was an implemented system that allowed for high-pressure air to be blown over the control surfaces to improve effectiveness in slow flight. This innovation reduced the landing speed to a mere 63 knots, cutting the landing distance in half. However, this feature was never implemented as it was deemed pointless since the aircraft could not take off from where it landed, since the feature did not affect the takeoff by any positive means. In 1959, the first 4 ski-based Hercules were produced. These were primarily used to support the scientific community in Antarctica, and the aircraft would transport cargo to field stations and camps. Due to the skis, it could land on an ice runway with great ease. Meanwhile, the Vietnam War is taking place, with both sides facing severe casualty. The United States Air Force makes a modification request for a ground attack variant of the C-130 Hercules family that would be able to perform long-endurance missions and would essentially be armed to the teeth. The airframe for the modification was manufactured by Lockheed Martin, whereas Boeing is responsible for converting the aircraft into a gunship. The first AC-130 was actually a converted AC-47 Spooky, which was part of Project Gunship 1. The result? A truly terrifying flying fortress. As hell in the sky by its enemies. The AC-130 was a game changer for the Americans during the Vietnam War, having destroyed more than 10,000 trucks that carried ammunition supplies for the North Vietnamese troops. In 1972, the AC-130H Spectre was deployed, which featured two 20mm Vulcan cannons, one 40mm Bofors cannon, and 105mm howitzer cannon. These aircraft also had non-pressurized cabins, which meant that they would have to operate at lower altitudes, approximately 7,000 feet. The gunfire heard from the AC-130H Spectre was one of the most chilling sounds that might be heard by troops, earning it the nickname Angel of Death.
We have one target.
I understand you got a lot of rounds. We got a lot of controllers.
Yeah, he's still off to the west a little bit. I'm pretty comfortable.
There is no hiding from this gunship. The deadly 105mm howitzer cannon can easily rip apart a concrete building and anything behind it. In fact, a vehicle that was directly hit by a 105 round only had a 10% chance to still be operable. However, the odds that the person at the wheel is still alive are near impossible. The guns themselves are mounted on the left side of the gunship, allowing the plane to fly a bank circle and strafe the target. On May 8, 1969, the AC-130 Spectre was able to shoot down an enemy helicopter, achieving it the first aerial victory. The gunship was very difficult to shoot down due to the altitude, making any unmanned launches such as RPGs useless, and the flares on board, which could deter any heat-seeking missiles, not to mention that the aircraft is heavily armed to take multiple blows and still be operational. However, 6 AC-130 Spectre gunships were downed throughout the war, mostly by anti-aircraft artillery whilst on truck hunting missions. During the conflicts in Iran, 1980, the United States were one of the combatants, and the United States government embarked on a top-secret mission, which would be one of the most ambitious yet mind-blowing innovations given to the C-130. This was codenamed Credible Sport. The plan was to modify the C-130 and allow it to rescue ground troops held hostage in Iran, capable of landing in extremely short, undeveloped runways of approximately 400 feet. The idea behind this was to retrofit the aircraft with rockets, which would slow it down during landing and provide extra force during takeoff. However, the project came to a standstill during October 1980, when one of the rocket-powered C-130s was coming in for a landing and ended up stalling. This occurred because the pilot activated the reverse rockets before the wheels on the landing gear even touched the runway, which meant that the aircraft would lose all of its thrust and come crushing down onto the runway. Luckily, no crew members were injured. Rocket-powered C-130s are still used up to date. Some are used in the Antarctic to assist takeoff from high-altitude camps. The C-130, named Fat Albert, is a rocket-powered modified variant, which is still used by the Blue Angels to this day. The most recent version of the Hercules that is still in production is the C-130J Super Hercules, which has the same look to it as the other variants, but is considerably upgraded technology. The T-56 engines were replaced with Rolls-Royce AE 2100 turboprops and composite scimitar propellers, which are shaped to increase sweep along the leading edge. The 130J also had improved avionics, including heads-up displays for each pilot. The upgrades granted the aircraft a 40% range increase, a 21% maximum speed increase, and a 41% shorter takeoff distance. In 2013, this variant would be converted into a new upgraded gunship known as the AC-130 Ghost Rider. This aircraft had internal 30mm guns, small diameter bombs, laser-guided missiles which were launched from the rear cargo door, a 105mm cannon and wing-mounted Hellfire missiles. The Ghost Rider is still used to this day and is one of the most impressive modern-day gunships. The C-130 Hercules family is the longest continuously produced military aircraft, at over 60 years. It is my personal favourite aircraft due to its heritage and the impacts that it had during the wars, alongside the innovations and progressions in design. We can only wait and see what the future holds for this aircraft.